Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I am Alex Kirsten. I'm the Deputy Director for the Renewing American Innovation Project here at CSIS. When we were launched at the beginning of 2021, there was no program at CSIS that focused on what made America competitive in the world and what the U.S. needed to do to continue to maintain that edge in the technological sphere in the 21st century. And in creating the program, it added a level of national security focus to technology issues, but also to what makes innovation in this country work in the way that it does, in the way that it is the envy of the world. And I'm happy today to kick off this event with Invent Together. They're a perfect partner in this endeavor as we highlight the role of trust in advancing equity and innovation. Their report that came out this past May. In it, they examine the patent knowledge gaps, trust's influence on pursuing patents, workplace culture, and the role of networks and support systems in purpose-driven innovation in looking at the overall landscape of the patent community and who is pursuing patents in this country. And with that, I would love to and be honored to introduce our distinguished speaker, Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland's 4th District. He was a partner at the law firm of Ivey and Leviton. He served as the state's attorney for Prince George's County from 2002 to 2011, and he was chief counsel to Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle on the Hill, as well as counsel to Paul Sarbanes, and chief majority counsel to the Senate Banking Committee. He's also worked for U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder and as an assistant U.S. attorney and chair of the Maryland Public Service Commission. He was also twice elected as the state's attorney for Prince George's County. And with that, I welcome Congressman Glenn Ivey. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for that introduction. How you doing? Uh-oh. I did the VP rally today at University of Maryland, so how you doing? It was like they were jumping out of their seats. So, but I know it's the afternoon, and you had big lunches and everything. But no, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the chance to come out and speak to you, and especially about this topic. The Invent Together survey, I thought, was and the report was an eye-opener for me in a lot of ways, but it also confirmed a lot of my experiences from private practice as well. And so I want to talk a little bit about their findings. I was joking with them backstage there a few minutes ago because they're going to do the presentation after I do the speech, and they've got the slides and everything. I said, this feels a little bit like a quiz, so I hope I get it right because I went through the report, but I did want to thank them for the work that they've done because the timing really couldn't be better for this sort of thing in a couple of different ways. One is the attacks on DEI. This goes to inclusion. And inclusion is important for a variety of reasons and diversity as well. But the other part of it, too, is because we're just getting outnumbered and outflanked by many of our competitors overseas, China in particular, but not solely. And I think a lot of what's going on in the United States in part is you've got this sort of whipsaw activity going on. On the one hand, I think the statistic I heard was about 38% of many of our scientists and engineers that are coming here to the United States are coming from China, which is fine. The other problem with that, though, is we've got this other piece going on in the Congress, which you may have seen, which is sort of a competition with the CCP that's, I think, is spilling over into sort of anti-Chinese sentiment. And so what might end up happening with that is we might end up pushing away people that we need to do the scientific inventing and engineering work at a time when we need it most in our competitive activities in the United States. The other part of that, too, though, is we have a lot of people in the United States that are not getting involved in these kinds of opportunities. They don't, for a variety of reasons. You've got a lot of it's class, a lot of it's race and economic, a lot of it's gender-based, and that's reflected in the report to some extent. But I think we have to try and find ways to make sure that we build those bridges and get them included because we need the numbers, we need the talent, we need the talent pool. And it's also going to be critical, I think, too, to the extent we are trying to have more of the United States activities focused on people in the United States, we got to grow them. We got to help them get to where they can actually participate in these kinds of activities. And then the last piece of that is the anti-DEI activities that are going on right now in the United States too. And you've seen those. They grew out of the Harvard UNC case that went back, I guess it's almost a year ago now, back to last summer. The United States Supreme Court came down with an opinion that limited affirmative action with respect to college admissions. That's sort of grown into other types of attacks on preferential treatment programs. But outside of the courts, you have this DEI attack that's going on. And it's, not to get too partisan on it, but you have folks who are opposed to any kind of DEI activities who started sending letters, threatening letters essentially to corporations across the country, law firms, businesses, saying if you continue with these activities, we're going to sue you. And the idea was to try and undermine it or eliminate those activities entirely. And it's frankly had an impact. There are certainly companies that have stepped back away from their commitments that they made, especially in the wake of the George Floyd activities that took place. I guess that's about 4 years ago now. A lot of companies came out and made commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they started doing some work on it. COVID got in the way in part, but now this is becoming an issue with respect to that too. So I think we've got to figure out in this context what sorts of things we can do to really build up these sort of efforts. And the report touched on a variety of aspects of that. And yeah, you won't be surprised, I guess, to hear that, people seeking patents, women, minorities, aren't as, registering as highly as other people in different communities are. And the report was trying to figure out why. And and they're going to present it, as I mentioned a minute ago. But I didn't want to talk about it from a personal perspective because, as you heard at my introduction, I was a private practitioner. I did not do patent law. My brother, as you pointed out, does patent litigation. I tried to stay as far away from it as I could because it's kind of complicated stuff. But I found myself being approached by people who were inventors, people who were trying to figure out how to navigate the system. And they turned to me frequently because before I went into private practice, I was the state's attorney, which is the local prosecutor. Now, as you know, local prosecutors don't have any particular expertise with respect to patents, but I was the lawyer they knew. Other than the guys that run the TV ads, was it Morgan & Morgan and the like? Well, they knew not to call those guys because nobody had been injured. But Ivey, I remember him. It was called state's attorney, attorneys in the name. Maybe he can help us out. So I would get calls from people frequently that had issues like this, their patents, they had inventions that they were trying to roll out. And I would try and chat with them and say, look, I don't have a background in this kind of thing. I can give you recommendations for people that do. I don't want to talk to those guys. Well, why not? Well, one of them is, they would say, well, I like you a lot. Or some of them would even say, I prayed on it and the Lord sent me to you. And what that meant was they wanted pro bono representation, actually. But the bottom line was they just didn't know a lot of lawyers, number one. Number two, they didn't know the system, how the patent process worked. They didn't know what they were getting themselves into. They knew they were jumping into the Shark Tank, right? Because everybody's heard these stories about, and I did lobby for Microsoft back in the day, so I know what they can do. Actually, maybe is it still too soon? I can't put those stories out, right? I don't know. Well, let's say it this way. There's a lot of competition in the patent world. There's a lot of conflict in the patent world. There's a lot of times where people get bought out in the patent world, which for some is the goal. There are others where people will tell you their ideas were stolen. And that's the story that they've heard. They've heard that if you have a good idea and you don't have the money to get it out and protect it, somebody's going to take it from you. And they saw the movie with, remember the delayed windshield wiper guy and all of that stuff. This is their conventional wisdom. This is what they know is out there. So they know they need help. They know it's a tough system. They know it can be risky and highly competitive, and potentially theft can take place while they're out there. But they know they don't have the money to pay for the type of legal representation that they're probably going to need, even to get to secure the patent up front and then to litigate it down the road. They know they don't have that. So there's a lot of distrust, there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of mistrust, I guess I should say, with respect to how the patent system works and how they can deal with it. So you listed out a series of factors that are issues, I think. Knowledge and awareness, certainly with respect to how patents work. I know there's a lot of people that know they need a patent, but they don't necessarily know how to go about procuring one. How do you do the application? What do you need to protect it? Second, networks and relationship building. A lot of these folks do not have the professional types of networks that many inventors, especially those that have come up in corporations, would necessarily have or more likely to have. And they don't necessarily have the informal assistance that they can get. They can't call up someone who's maybe been through this before and say, hey, what's this like? Or can you recommend somebody? What are the pitfalls that I should try and avoid? Collaboration's another aspect that goes to the same piece with respect to networking. Transparency, especially with respect to how the process works, to the extent there are disputes. I'm on the House Judiciary Committee, and one of the things we hear a lot about is from people who are litigating these patent issues, and they're trying to find, whether it's in court or at the patent office, and I can go into that if y'all want, but there's enormous controversies about what the better way to go there is. But there's sometimes uncertainty about how it works and how it ought to work and how long it's going to take to work and how expensive it's going to be to get it to work. And so, there's a lot of question marks that people face when they're looking into the system. And I think it can put them off. And then the values alignment one, which was actually one I hadn't really thought about and didn't experience in the same way. But once I read it, and that goes to the issue of people who their professional commitment is to try and do things to help a community. The community they came from, might be help African Americans or women or low income people, whatever it is. But there's a concern that if I get a patent, and it sort of takes on a life of its own, or someone buys the patent or the like, it may not be used for what I wanted it to be used for. I guess this would be, Oppenheimer would be the example on steroids, but that's the kind of concern that they have too. Is this really going to be a public social benefit in the way that I had hoped that it would be? So I think that they've done a great job of identifying these kinds of issues. They'll go through the methodology and the focus group piece. But I did want to say a couple of things about this, about things that I think we can try and do, and I'm assuming you'll cover this on the panel as well. I think it's great to have identified it. I think it makes sense to point this out and make sure that we're trying to take steps to address it. But B, it really goes to a bigger systemic issue that goes to our education system in some part. A lot of students are not getting the kind of STEM-related education that they need to have the chance to go into these kinds of fields. My district's Prince George's County. It's the eastern border of Washington, D.C. We have a great STEM school there. It's called Eleanor Roosevelt. We have a lot of schools that don't have great STEM education tracks as well, high schools. And so to the extent that's the issue, and it's not just Prince George's County, frankly, it's across the country. My daughter married a man who was German. He came up in Germany. And they came back to the United States, thank God, finally, and decided to buy a house here. After they had the grandkid, I was like, I'm putting my foot down. Y'all got to come back. Come back to the country. But he was appalled at what he saw in the American public education system. He looked here and he said, "This is ridiculous. You guys are the leader of the free. You're the." And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, your schools are not keeping up." And if you look at the rankings, I think we're like 35th or 36th or something among other Western democracies as far as rankings from education. And those of you who are hiring people, you can see it too. And I'm not going to dwell on this Gen Z thing because I think this is not, it's not them. I mean, this has been a problem that's been there for the United States for as long as I can remember. And I'm getting to that point now where my memory goes back quite a ways. So we know this is a problem. We know we need to work on it. And it's going to become even more important as AI rolls out because we don't actually know at this point what AI is going to be, what it's going to do, where it's going to take us. But we know we better educate ourselves to make sure we can keep up with it. Well, to the extent we can. We've got the Terminator crowd on my committee who, think the machines are going to take over. I don't know that I'm that concerned about it in that way, but it's clear that there's a lot of folks who there's a huge potential that a lot of people will get left behind by AI. They always tell us, no, it's going to create new jobs, but it looks to me like the jobs that are going to disappear are going to be far outnumbering the jobs that will be created by AI, and we need to figure out how to address that. And the other challenge with respect to that is, how do we prepare people for the jobs that will be created when the other jobs disappear? The example I'll give you is when NAFTA was passed, and I was on the Hill when that happened. So I'm that old, yeah. That was in the 90s, and the promise that we made, the Democrats primarily, Clinton, and I was on the Senate side working for Senator Daschle at the time. And the promise we made was, these jobs are going to go overseas, but we're going to retrain you. We're going to put education programs in place. You get retooled, you'll be able to go into new jobs. And what we found was that didn't happen, especially for people who are like 50 or older. They didn't get the new training, and if they did, they weren't given the jobs because employers wanted to hire the young kid instead of the old guy and pay less. It's sort of like the football, you get the rookie instead of the vet. And so we had this whole generation of people who started losing their jobs and having no place to go. AI could be something similar to that, but on a much more expansive basis than what we had with respect to the industrial transfer of those jobs to first Mexico and then China. So we really need to get on top of this, I think, in a very aggressive way, and I think try and manage what's coming with it. And I'm always reluctant to say AI because it's such a broad umbrella and it covers so many things, but we know it's going to have a huge impact. And to the extent we're looking at people who they're trying to invent new things, AI is going to be one of the tools that could be used to do that or to test them or the like. We were at a conference and they were talking about how, I forget what the particular test was, but with current computers, they said it would take 2,000 years to test out the theory that they had that they were trying to build something on. But with the AI computers, I think they're called quantum computers, I believe. It took 2 weeks. Don't laugh at me. Come on now. I'm trying hard. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. But the quantum computers could do it in 2 weeks, where the other computers needed 2,000 years. And so we know it's going to be helpful, but who's running the quantum computers? Well, obviously it's not me because I'm struggling to remember what to call it. And there's a lot of old dogs like me that are out there. So think about, what that means, the comparison to the 50-year-old we promised to retrain, and now we've got 40-year-old, 30-year-old, AI comes and wipes out what you were doing, or even more concerning, I think. We've got kids going to school now, young adults, I apologize, that want to become X. And that field might not exist in 4 years. One quick example on that front. In my district, we have a company that builds ceramic batteries. It's a new thing. And I have a colleague they're building out a development piece in his district for old school batteries, lithium batteries. He's real excited about it. It's a multi-million-dollar investment. The problem with lithium batteries is, A, they can catch on fire and blow up, and B, they use these minerals that frequently are mined using slave labor from overseas. And ceramic batteries are cheaper. I think this technology eliminates that in very short order. As soon as we can build it out, I think those will be gone. So what does that mean for people in that industry? What does that mean for the U.S. investment or the local investment to build that out? What happens to those workers who are structuring their lives around that? And then one last point, this is a little off topic, but hopefully not too far. From the federal government perspective, I was just in Israel the other day, and we went to visit this company called Raphael. And Raphael's the company that built the Iron Dome. And they started talking about the things that they're doing for the next this is Tony Stark times 10, for those of you who know Iron Man. The stuff that they do is real. There's laser technology and the like for missile defense systems. And, I started thinking about what that could mean from the standpoint of the international impact, but also, who's developing this stuff? Who are the people? And I'm sure they've got their patent attorneys all over these to make sure that they're protected. But who's developing it? Who understands it? Who knows how to manage it? And to what extent will those of us who are looking to participate in this system as either voters to support it, customers who are clients, potential employees, how do we make sure everybody gets integrated into all of these kinds of activities as we move forward? The chasm is great. I think especially based on income and race here in the United States, it looks to me like it's becoming bigger and bigger instead of smaller and smaller. And I'm really worried that it will accelerate based on what's happening with respect to AI and other types of scientific developments and advances. And to the extent you have additional barriers to protect it, and patents are a good thing, I'm not criticizing them at all because they help to spur innovation. But, to the extent you've got this whole separate world with its own language, its own systems, its, barriers to entry and the like that I think are pointed out in the report, and that cause people to be concerned, the lack of transparency. Folks worry that, I don't know if I can get into that Shark Tank and compete and survive. It could get worse than it is now. So I'll stop there, but I want to thank CSIS for giving me a chance to come speak about this, but especially for taking a look at this, because I think this is one of those issues that might not always get the kind of spotlight that it deserves, but these are some of the big issues that the United States and the world will be facing as we move forward. And thanks for your report. I think it does an outstanding job of really putting its finger on the issue and helping us figure out what the challenges are and hopefully develop some solutions to help us get through it. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Congressman. Really insightful remarks, and we're going to delve into them. No worries. We're going to ask just a few questions about specific sections of the patent code and see how that goes. But before we do any of that, let me introduce this fantastic panel. First of all, the authors of the report that the Congressman mentioned, beginning with Jessica Milley. She is a PhD economist with over 10 years of experience directing high-impact research projects and evaluations with a focus on social and economic equity. She's the founder of Research to Impact, and she utilizes a mixed method research approach that helps organizations, philanthropists, and policymakers leverage data and stories to drive social impact. The co-author of the report right next to me is Brianne Branch. She also has a PhD in educational leadership policy and foundations and social science from the University of Missouri, although much more important than any of that, all her undergraduate degrees and so on, and her background is from Los Angeles and UCLA. She has worked in higher education for several years, came back to Southern California for a while. She served as the Associate Director of the Women in Engineering Department at the School of Engineering at UCLA. Next to them is somebody for whom all this is done for, an inventor, Margot Bagley. Margot is currently a professor of law at Emory. She came to Emory University in 2016 after a decade at the University of Virginia School of Law, where she was the Hardy Cross Dillard Professor of Law. She was also the Heiken Visiting Professor in Patent Law at Harvard, also for us in Los Angeles known as the UCLA of the East. Margot is a very well-known and widely cited scholar on a variety of international IP topics and is one of the foremost experts on international patent law issues. Importantly, before all of that, she was a chemical engineer, research and development engineer at Procter & Gamble, and she has several patents, one of them at Procter & Gamble and two more recently with her husband, and they started a new company based on those. Last but not least, Holly Fechner. She is the executive director of Invent Together, the organization that commissioned the report we're talking about today. She's also a partner at Covington and Burling. She's the co-chair of Covington's Technology Industry Group, and she has served as policy director for Senator Kennedy and as an adjunct at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Okay, and you've heard the great introduction of Congressman Ivey. So let's start the conversation. Let me start with Holly and ask you, your organization does a lot of work with respect to diversity of innovation, and you commissioned the report. Maybe you can tell us why you did that and what caused you to commission the report.
Well, thanks so much, Andre, and I really appreciate the opportunity that CSIS has given us to partner on this event together. I'm just thrilled to be here with the Congressman, who was a colleague when we both worked in the Senate, and these wonderful experts on diversity and innovation. So Invent Together is an alliance of universities, companies, and nonprofits, and we're committed to ensuring that everybody has the opportunity to invent and patent. What we've done is we've got multiple prongs to what we do. Public education, public policy, but research is foundational to what we do. So beginning in 2016, we commissioned our first report because very little work has been done on the issue of inclusive innovation. So we did a series of reports with the Institute for Women's Policy Research. And what we were trying to do at the beginning was just document the challenge that we're facing here. So out of the work that we did and then subsequent work that the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office did, we know the following things. We know that of inventors listed on U.S. patents, less than 13% are women. And of all patents, people of color are only 8%, even though they're a much higher percentage of the population as a whole. And this issue is really important in terms of socioeconomic mobility, where low-income people are not patenting at the rate that we would want them to, irrespective of education ability. And I think also astounding is the geographical issues that relate to this. So we know that inventors from only 20 US counties have half of the patents of the entire US population. So you can see how concentrated our inventive capacity is in the United States on so many different dimensions. And so this is really what we're trying to do at Invent Together, is break these down and try to ensure that we really unleash this incredible inventive opportunity that we have as a society and as a country. So we did a number of different studies that I think really led us to the point where we asked Jessica and Brianne to do this particular study. So we did work, like I said, just documenting the challenge, but also we've done some qualitative work where researchers from the Institute for Women's Policy Research did interviews, very focused interviews with inventors, particularly women of color, to try to understand more deeply what the challenges are, what are the barriers, and how we can overcome them. And one of the things that we realized from that study was that trust was an issue. And so we were thrilled to work with Jessica and Brianne, and in a minute you'll hear more about the specifics of their work.
Great, thanks, Holly. I do want to emphasize the dire numbers, and Congressman Ivey mentioned some of it in his opening remarks. The United States is definitely falling behind in many areas of technology. When I was the director, I used to say that we're operating with a hand tied behind our backs. Now I think we're operating with a hand and 4 fingers tied behind our backs. The reality is that women participate at 12 or 13% rate. People of color, single digits, 8% is a number I've seen before. But innovation is not only demographically concentrated, it is also geographically and economically concentrated. So it is no matter what or what community you come from, you're not inventing unless you're in basically 5 communities centered around the coasts. In great degree, the rest of the large swaths of the United States barely participate, and folks from economically underrepresented communities don't participate almost at all. So demographically, geographically, economically, innovation in the United States is extremely concentrated, and large percentages of our country are left behind, and that's detrimental to them, to their communities, to their companies, and obviously to the United States. The most remarkable thing is that a lot of the companies actually have the employees on premises. And the study that we did at the PTO showed that almost across the board, only about the women participate only at about half the rate of their employment in STEM jobs. That means that they're already gotten the education, they're in the seats, they have the qualifications, and still they're not participating at the same rate, or even, it's no more than about half. One of the best companies for that actually is Procter & Gamble. It's number 1 in our reports twice in a row by a significant margin, but still, even there, they're not close to being on par. And Margot, you worked at Procter & Gamble. Maybe you can tell us a little bit what sorts of best practices you saw there, and why overall, in general, do you see this issue as important, and what can be done?
Sure. And I'm also delighted to be here and to be able to participate in this discussion. It's a very important issue. The report is important because it's adding to a growing body of literature about the causes of the lack of or the under-participation that we have by women and underrepresented minorities in this area, and it does matter. Representative Ivey mentioned China. It matters for global competitiveness. China, for a long time, has had an all-hands-on-deck approach to patenting, inventing, providing subsidies to people who file patent applications. You could get your prison term reduced if you came up with a great invention. And I'm not saying that we have to do that, but nevertheless, they dramatically increased the number of people who are participating in the invention process. And we have not been doing that. And we have, as it's been said, so many people, one report says lost Einsteins who would have and could have contributed really important inventions to the benefit of our society, to our competitiveness, but did not have the opportunity, did not have the knowledge. It matters also because people often invent based on the problems that they have and the problems they see. So research shows that women inventors, women teams of inventors are more likely to develop solutions to problems that affect women. Male teams are more likely, not that they only do, to develop solutions to problems that affect men. I've seen this on the continent of Africa, where inventors there were focused on problems that were related to their particular circumstances. So if we have an underrepresentation of inventors from different demographic groups, we're going to have an underproduction of inventions to solve the problems that those particular communities face. So that affects not only who's participating in the invention process, but who gets to benefit from innovation. So it's really important that we start to figure out this problem and change it, because it is something that can be changed. And I don't want to preempt too much, but knowledge is so important, and that's one of the things that Procter & Gamble is really good about. That's where I learned about patenting. That's where I saw my first patent, was as a summer intern at Procter & Gamble, and I was asked to actually analyze a patent. And as a summer intern, I came up with an invention to increase chocolate flavor in devil's food cakes by 20%. It was great. It was a really great process. And I was encouraged to file an invention disclosure. But I left after the summer, and it never got done, and nobody followed up with me. And that's one of the ways that it can happen, that things can slip through the cracks with inventors. So there are a lot of things that can be done. I think once we hear about the study, we can talk more about that.
Great, thanks, Margot. So now let's turn to the study and turn the podium over to Jessica and Brianne. Before I do that, let me correct myself. Brianne is from Los Angeles, but she went to Howard, not to UCLA. She did ultimately, though, end up teaching at UCLA, and now she's a DEI expert. So with that, please tell us about the report.
Great. So can we get the slides brought up? Thank you. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you to CSIS for hosting us. We're really excited to talk to you all today about our new report. So the motivation for this study, and Andre kind of alluded to this in his remarks, was that even in academic and corporate settings where inventors usually have access to significant resources and supports to help them navigate the patenting process, women and people of color are still not participating in invention and patenting at rates that we would expect them to, given their representation in the relevant population. So while supports and resources are important pieces of the puzzle to getting greater participation in patenting, there's got to be other factors at play that might be preventing further participation. And so our hypothesis for the report was that trust or a lack of trust can influence many different factors throughout the decision process and application process for a patent. It can influence how you choose to consume information, who you go to for support, whether and how you engage with different resources to help you throughout the process, whether you decide to actually apply for a patent. And all of these things can ultimately affect your success in your patenting endeavors. And so to answer this question, we utilized a mixed methods research approach, starting with a number of focus groups with a very diverse group of people representing all different levels of engagement in innovation and patenting, from people who had never heard of a patent before, all the way to people who had filed multiple patent applications. And so our findings from these focus groups really helped us understand some of the key issues and barriers that people from marginalized communities are facing in engaging in patenting. And they helped us develop a quantitative survey to get at this, all of these issues in greater detail with a wider audience. And so what we found with respect to trust is that people are generally pretty trusting, particularly of people who are in a position to help them navigate the patenting process and offer them professional advice. But at the same time, they also exercise a certain amount of caution when they are considering who to go to for help and support. So for example, about 2/3 of people who we surveyed said that they preferred to work through challenges that they're facing at work or in their business on their own. And 73% felt that it's best to keep their ideas very closely guarded to prevent others from stealing them, which goes back to some of the remarks the Congressman brought up in his opening statements. And these findings are true across the board, across different demographic groups. But we did find that women and people of color tended to be a little less trusting and more cautious than people from other backgrounds. Black women in particular tended to be less trusting and more cautious. So with them, 97% felt that it was best to be cautious before trusting others for professional advice, and 91% felt that they needed to keep their ideas closely guarded to prevent others from stealing them. So what does this mean for patenting? Well, we found that people who were less trusting and more cautious were on average about 18% less likely to even consider pursuing a patent if they had an idea for a new product or a technology. But on the other hand, if they did have people in their networks that they could trust to help them develop their ideas and help them navigate the process, they were 72% more likely to feel confident in knowing where to start and who to talk to. They were 65% more confident in understanding what is required to file a patent application. They were 70% more likely to feel confident in being able to finance the cost of a patent. And they were 57% more likely to feel confident in finding someone in their network to help them navigate the process. So our research found that there are really 5 key avenues for building trust in the patent system and in the key individuals and institutions that inventors need to go to for support to help them navigate that process. They are knowledge and awareness, networks and relationship building, collaboration, transparency, and values alignment. And my colleague and co-author, Brianne, is going to talk to you guys in a little bit more detail about some of the challenges and limitations that we identified through our research within the ecosystem along all of these different avenues, and what some of the opportunities are for developing policies and practices to help build trust and advance greater participation in the patenting ecosystem.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here and to be on our esteemed panel, so thank you. Like Jessica said, this report is about trust, and so I will be going over 5 key things that we found. I want to just go into detail, and I wanted to just put the whole slide up there because, yeah, so. Most people found minimal or no knowledge of patents, and most were unaware of the different services available to inventors in general. This resulted in lower trust in the patent system itself and key resources and service providers. So for example, with minimum or no knowledge, 27% were less likely to trust the USPTO, 24% less likely to trust patent examiners, and then 25% less likely to trust their TTOs. So participants also noted that diversity and representation in patent education matters, particularly to women and people of color. Study participants were more trusting of information that was presented by someone who looked like them and provided diverse examples that allowed them to see themselves as a potential inventor. Next is negative workplace erodes trust. So for this key finding, women and people of color were more likely to have frequent negative experiences in the workplace, such as being ignored and talked over in meetings, having ideas taken by other coworkers, just general lack of respect from the colleagues. They could be patent attorneys, teammates, other colleagues across the department, and then just idea rejection from PIs and supervisors overall. These experiences took their toll and negatively affect behaviors and attitudes important to successfully navigate the patenting system. There we go. So what that resulted in decreased willingness to share thoughts and ideas with managers and coworkers, decreased willingness to share questions or to seek help when needed, and just overall diminished trust in coworkers and managers. Our next key finding was transparency, and we've hit on this a little bit already, but I did want to point out that in our study, many participants shared that their institution does not have clear policies and procedures in place to document how inventions should be disclosed and how they will be evaluated. This made them believe that they were not being evaluated fairly, therefore diminishing trust in their institution. This was really interesting. In a write-in on the survey, we asked respondents what institutions could do to build trust with them. Even though they could write about anything they wanted, nearly 10% emphasized the need for greater transparency in the organization. And our final values alignment, final key factor is values alignment. So women and people of color are more motivated to invent to solve societal problems and benefit their communities, like Congressman Glenn has already said. They will less likely consider pursuing a patent for the inventions if they felt that their patent was at odds with their own goals and motivation for inventing in the first place. This was particularly challenging for women and people of color in academic and corporate settings, where inventors must disclose their inventions to their institutions and assign rights to them. So for our focus group inventors, they struggled with this because there was a worry about how the invention would be once they lost control of it. Survey respondents, 35% of Hispanic women and 29% of Black women, said that concerns about their invention not benefiting the populations they wanted to help may prevent them from inventing altogether. So those are the key findings. We talked about a lot of the issues with trust, but we did come up with some recommendations in our study that I'll just take a moment to highlight and we'll continue to discuss today. Our findings informed the development of a number of recommendations, broadly in recommendations that fell into three categories. So that's public policy, workplace culture, and education. So public policy, we found that inventors had mixed experiences with working with different resources and service providers. Those that had negative experiences overall often sought help from service providers who weren't adequately equipped to help them. And so that diminished their trust. And that led us to our public policy recommendations, which are to better equip, support, and individuals with resources and focus on effective ways to engage with marginalized communities. For workplace culture, institutions must invest in strategies to promote inclusive and collaborative work environments in order to foster trust and to lessen negative work environments, which is a major issue here. They also needed to develop clear and consistent procedures for invention and disclosure and evaluating them. And our final recommendation, education. This was like a really big recommendation, which basically participants in the focus group highlight the importance of education in building trust in the patent system. We must develop and implement education curriculum that can be delivered at every level of our education system and ensure that everyone has access to this knowledge, further emphasizing diversity and partnering with trusted community leaders to deliver education to help foster trust within marginalized communities. So that's a high level of the report, and we can take questions, and I'll hand the conversation back over to Andre. Thank you.
Great, really amazing. Thank you so much for the presentation. You know, I wouldn't mind if you left the last slide up.
Sure.
I got to tell you, as I was listening to you, I had two conflicting thoughts at the same time, actually multiple thoughts, but one is like so depressing. Like 83% of would-be inventors do not know almost anything about patents or the patent system. It's shocking, and it's not surprising. You know, I went to engineering school, and Margot, so did you. You mandatorily have to take math and statistics and physics and chemistry and stuff that I've never ever once, like, you know, multiple, you know, calculus, can't even pronounce the stuff I learned.
Different equations.
Completely useless, okay? Not a single class mentioned patents at all. No requirement, not even offered.
Yeah.
Of course, that was a long time ago. I don't think it's much different now. So that's on the education front. But at the same time, I feel very hopeful because there's a tremendous opportunity here. So with that, from the hopeful point of view, I want to go to the Congressman and just ask you, first of all, what you thought about the report now that you've seen them presented, but also from a public policy perspective, you know, as a member of Congress, what could be done here? Because there's tremendous potential for doing good here.
Yeah, I think, is that on?
There you go.
I think that one of the ways we can try and approach it is to try and get guidance from those who've been into it. How could we help you get there? I mean, the 83% number is pretty striking. And I know we had patent law in law school. I didn't take it, but yeah, it might be. I'm not sure I'm aware of any other place where it might be available. I mean, does the patent office offer courses like that?
Sure, the patent office offers lots of education, and we have one, at least one of the members here today. But and it's on the website at uspto.gov. But the reality is, I don't think it's reaching those who need it and when they need it. You know, you have to have a level of education to even know that there's a website at the PTO to look at. And I was an engineer, I didn't know.
I mean, we do have a series of small business entities and service facilities, SBA and others, that are across the country. They're aimed more at, you know, the managerial and administrative parts of opening and running a business. But, you know, I don't know if these sorts of trainings are available there, but certainly that would be a place where people who are in business or interested in getting in business and need to try and get these skills might turn to try and find them. And, you know, I'm just trying to think out loud. It probably would make sense to have some sort of, well, I'll say it this way. It was funny to hear you talk about physics and never having used it, because usually us philosophy majors are the ones that say that kind of thing. But it is kind of, you know, there's a lot of practical training and education that we don't provide in the United States. Civics, personal financial planning is another one. You know, my kids, I have 6 kids, and I know, gasp. But the young, they're sort of mid-30s to early 24, another Howard grad. But they have no background or they've given no guidance about personal financial stuff. They just kind of chat with me and, you know, oh, you're not in the, well, you should do that. So this would be another area where we shouldn't just leave it to the families or passing it down informally. It should be available. And I would think that maybe even the high school level, you can try and find ways, because it's letting people know, just part of the civics process, that patents might be of interest. If you do invent something, this is, you know, this is something you should know about. I don't even know if we really broach it in that way. It's just straight biology, you know, and I think that's a mistake on our part.
Yeah, there's lots of failure and gaps there. The reality is, my view is, it needs to start in kindergarten, because we lose a lot of these kids by middle school when, basically, in quotes here, math and science is no longer cool, much less, concepts of intellectual property law. And, it's not just patents, it's also copyrights, the protections for songs that they listen to and the movies they watch. But I really think that the United States needs an organized system. And, frankly, I do think Congress could commission the USPTO, for example, or some government agency to create a systematic set of recommendations that can be implemented. And, it comes to education, both STEM and the legal concepts that we're talking about here at every single level, kindergarten to college and beyond. Second, employment, just getting the folks hired in the first place. But even as our reports show, even once hired, making sure that they have equal access to the opportunities. And then third, the procurement and enforcement process when it comes to both intellectual property rights of any kind, including patents, but others too, as well as access to capital. At every level, we need to do so much more, and there's no plan for this country. There's nobody talking in a comprehensive, cohesive way. And I'm afraid that without an official push from Congress or from the White House, for example, or something like that, it's not going to happen.
Andre, if I could take that on, I wholly agree with you. It really seems like it's time for the United States to have an innovation council or some kind of entity that really takes on these issues as a whole. But focusing specifically on education, we like to think of it in three buckets. There's invention education, there's STEM education, and then there's patent education. Now, I think most people in this country, or at least people focused on education issues, understand what STEM education is. And there's a lot of focus in the Congress about ensuring that we provide and fund STEM education. But almost nobody is talking about invention education and patent education except the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So invention education can absolutely and should absolutely be started at the youngest ages, because this is just helping kids think with an inventive mindset. How can you solve the problem, right? I mean, this is really the foundation of inventing and patenting, is being curious and, being open to solving problems. So that's something that I think would really be exciting to have as part of the curriculum for our younger ages. And then patent education, I do have to say that I don't think the high schools and the universities are doing a good job at all on this. Right now, it's basically up to the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and I think they're really taking to heart one of the lessons from this trust study, which is to make sure that the people who are offering the education are people that the communities relate to and feel like there's somebody that they can trust. So, I see a progression of what's happening at the USPTO. Just from the perspective of Invent Together, we saw this as a gap too. So we did both design, and now we offer a free line patent education course called the Inventors Patent Academy. And what we felt was missing from the opportunities that were out there for patent education was a course that was designed specifically for women and people of color and people from historically underrepresented groups. So we did work with experts in the field to make sure that the course did that. And we've got, a series of interviews throughout this online education course from inventors speaking from their own personal experience. But I agree, a lot more needs to be done and can be done.
Yeah, so Margot, you're the educator on the panel here. What can law schools do really? First of all, probably most law schools don't even have a patent law class or an IP class, I don't know. But even the ones that do, what more can they do to help their students as well as the undergrads?
Sure. So as Holly mentioned, patent education is a part of it. And the USPTO is doing quite a bit. One of the things are clinics. And in fact, at Emory, we're just launching our new USPTO certified patent clinic to provide pro bono services to inventors, because resources are a real barrier. That is a problem. If you're not in a corporation, it was no problem when I was at Procter & Gamble. Of course, I wasn't going to get the same benefit, but nevertheless, I didn't have to worry about patent fees. When my husband and I, we had to look seriously at the cost of obtaining patent protection in the US and in other countries, and what do we do if we have to enforce it? So those are real challenges. I wanted to say something, though, about education. And in Georgia, we have the Georgia IP Alliance, the US IP Alliance, Global IP Alliance, the brainchild of Scott Frank, who's really a visionary on this, that is really working on K through 12 education about patents and IP. But there's literature that shows that you need more than just the knowledge, because in many companies, women have knowledge, but they don't necessarily see themselves as inventors. And one of the things that was shown is that particularly girls need to see female inventors, and that has more of an impact on them becoming inventors themselves than seeing male inventors, because of the ability to connect and see themselves as an inventor. There's a lot of really great work that's being done piloting different programs. And Meta, for example, Kevin Alstrom, noticed they have an invention portal that inventors are supposed to submit to. He's like, it was mostly men that were submitting. Only 10% of women were filing, and yet they're 30% of the engineers. And so they switched from an opt-in, where you have to have the initiative to file, to an opt-out. If you're hiring people to invent, assume that they're going to invent, and go around and talk to them and see, well, what exactly have you invented and come up with? They also came up with these ideation groups, getting people together, identifying problems that the company had, and having them work in groups, coming up with ideas. But the individuals were actually writing down ideas, and then patent attorneys would evaluate it. And they got so many ideas, and women who had specifically said, well, inventors that's above my pay grade. They talked about one in particular who, after going through that, she's like, I can see myself as an inventor. She's submitted 16 invention disclosures. She's named on 6 patent applications. So there needs to be, in many cases, a shift in mindset, the ability to see yourself as an inventor. You talked about the geographical concentration. Many children of inventors become inventors and invent in the same areas as their parents. So this, makes it. My father was a PhD chemist and college professor, and I remember as a child him telling me, and I used to go to his lab and see his chemistry lab and the things he was working on. And telling me when he worked for the Metric Chemical Company, he came up with a compound that I don't know what it did, but they called it Emersite. His name was Emerson. They named it after him. They didn't get a patent. But, that helped me to see, okay, that's great. I can come up with new things. And I went to school and became a chemical engineer. So if we increase the number of women and underrepresented minorities who are inventing and becoming inventors, it'll have ripple effects, generational effects, geographical effects. It's really important that we identify what the challenges are and work on them.
Okay, one more question, and then I think we have time for some audience questions. But for you, Brianne and Jessica, to me it seems like the lowest hanging fruit would be the middle one, the workplace culture. Mm-hmm. It seems like the companies have an interest to get as many of its employees that are already in the seats to invent. Yeah. And yet, we found when we did the progress and potential reports at the USPTO that is not happening. It's certainly not happening at scale. What's the barrier there? What more can be done to get the companies themselves to get going?
Yeah, it's really interesting that I'm a qualitative researcher by trade, so doing the focus groups and writing the analysis and seeing the workplace culture jumped out immediately. It was just like, oh yeah, our company doesn't do this. They expect us academics, they're saying they expect us to teach these courses, and research is also really important, but the patenting is not tied to like our tenure. And so why would I take my time and energy to patent if I need to teach these classes, serve on committees, and do all these other things? And similar things were found in workplace settings and also in private sectors. As a DEI practitioner, I always tell my leadership teams I work with, that I consult, and even my students that I teach equity and inclusion to, you need to tie whatever that goal is to the organizational goal. So for this, we have a recommendation that says tying invention and patenting into the organizational goal or value or principle automatically includes that workplace culture that generates positivity around inventing. And when you put budget behind it, just like with diversity work, when you put budgets behind these offices that you create, then that adds the true value. So that's just one low-hanging fruit. And also having more a team collaboration, having people to come in cross-departmentally, that was something we found, is that people in corporate settings had more positive experiences when they would work with people outside their department, and they would partner together. And I just found that really interesting. And so allowing for a more inclusive workplace culture and putting invention at the center of their values and what they say they want to do, much like diversity, equity, inclusion.
And I would add to that too, kind of riffing off something that Margot said. This came out primarily in our focus group conversations, talking with academic women inventors. But you know, it's really important that you have someone at your organization who is trying to bring you in and make you see yourself as an inventor, reaching out to you, seeing what you're working on and how that might be potentially patentable. Because, you know, there's research out there that says women wait to be invited, right? Yes. And so for the women that we talked to, they had an amazing tech transfer office who, as soon as they got to campus, when they were hired, was reaching out to them and saying, hey, let's set up a meeting. We want to talk to you about who we are, what we do, what we help scientists with. And we just want to, you know, learn about your work and what you're working on and how we can, you know, help you with that. And they would periodically reach out to them, you know, every couple of months to check in and see how things were going, check on the research that they talked about, and whether it might be time for them to start thinking about, you know, filing an invention disclosure and an application. Mm-hmm. So those sorts of practices can be really beneficial in getting more people engaged, particularly from marginalized backgrounds like women and people of color.
Great. Any questions from the audience?
I got to run. I got a 5:30.
Okay.
But I did want to thank you for giving me a chance to speak to the audience and to sit on the panel. And I hope we can follow up on this. This has been a great learning experience for me. I appreciated the chance to read the report. I think I heard a mission call for Congress from here today.
At least one.
And I look forward to taking you up on it.
Excellent.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank
you so much. Okay. Any questions? If not, I'm going to call on people. Alex, by the way, how much time do we have?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yes, Elizabeth. I was going to call on you anyway.
I figured I'd beat you to the punch. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank all of you for sharing your insights, for doing. Thank you. Not sure it's on. But
there
is
you
it
go.
perfect? One more time. First and foremost, thank you for this research. It adds to the compilation of information, education, and most importantly, awareness. Because I think awareness, we might all agree, is the first step in solving the problem, or at least working towards solving the problem, identifying what the parameters of the issues are. I agree with everything that's been said here today, and I know, speaking on behalf of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, we are trying our darndest in avenues across the nation, pilot programs, initiatives, to make a difference, to have an impact, and to change these demographics that we've spoken about today. I'd be excited to know more about the conversation on values alignment, because I see that one, at least in my mind, being very challenging, because people's values are their values, and they've been created over potentially a lifetime. It comes from how they grew up, the world they've lived in, the parents they had, or what they haven't had. How do we work with that, and how the intellectual property system is available to them? How can we navigate that conversation in a way to make positive change?
So I can start with that and let others jump in. A couple of thoughts come to mind. First is with respect to some of the conversation that we've had on invention and patent education. So integrating some of that into that educational piece, I think, would be really beneficial. I think a lot of the people that we spoke with in the focus groups and heard from in the surveys have this very narrow idea of what patents are and the types of people who would pursue patents. And I think there's this idea that, you're only patenting to, make money and, prevent competition and all of these things. But there's so many other benefits to patents beyond that. And it's a way for people who have a more social, motivation for their work to get their ideas out there and share them with the world and make sure that those communities can benefit from them. And so integrating that sort of information into our education on patents, I think, would be helpful. And I think Brianne had talked a little bit about this in her remarks. But corporations and universities can do a little bit more to connect patenting with their mission and corporate values, to make sure that there's an understanding from their employees on, the idea that the work that they're doing is going to be making a difference. It's not just going to their company's bottom line or their university's bottom line, so they can understand what that larger impact is going to be.
Yeah, I would add on to that as far as just even providing the question for someone to write why. What does this mean to them? And when it gets to the technical piece of working with patent examiners and the actual application process, making it a part of a collaborative culture where you're understanding that, okay, someone who answers for a societal purpose gets a certain point or a certain point where it comes up higher as far as getting approved. So it's really about weaving into the structures, adding into the education piece, adding into the values piece, but finding those technical ways while we're asking, okay, if I'm a woman of color and I want to talk about working on a system where my phone can recognize me and I don't have to be in light, but when I'm in light, my phone only recognizes me to unlock my password. Well, I want to be able to work on a patent that will help me to, would create to have darker skin to work on the phone like everybody else. Like, that has meaning, and that's, I'm sure, probably being worked on now, but that has meaning. And so having that into an application where the processors and the people who are approving these understand why that matters, I think that will add into the layers of this conversation. You'll see more diverse patents and different diverse technologies even be brought to the table.
Okay, one more question, and I think Sujay had his hand up.
Sorry, thank you so much for this really excellent panel. When you talk about trust, thank you. Normally you think about problems of information and then problems of motivation. And in terms of information, I think you've covered in terms of how do you get people educated and so forth. But in terms of motivation, I think exhortation is one part of it. But if you talk about workforce culture, to what extent do firms include patenting, for example, in their criteria for promotions and other types of workforce and advancement?
You want to add on to that?
I don't know that I've seen a whole lot of research out there that looks at the extent to which patents are included in promotion decisions. I know that there are a number of universities in particular that don't take patents into account when they're reviewing faculty tenure cases, but from the corporate perspective, I don't know that there's a whole lot of research out there in that regard. Holly, if you want to talk, I think there was some information in one of the previous IWPR reports that looked a little bit at that.
I too am not aware of research that will, give us some overall statistics, but we do work very closely with companies on their best practices. And we see companies diverging in terms of how well they deal with these issues and whether they're making progress. And one of the things that we've seen is that companies that have various different ways of celebrating their inventors and the patents that they get, I think are making more progress. And let me just give you a few examples of things that we see companies doing. Some do give bonuses, compensation based on patenting. Others have different ways of celebrating. For example, I'm familiar with a company where on their business cards, they put, whether somebody is a patent holder, and they have regular celebrations about people getting patents. So I think there's more to be done here in terms of using this as one of the internal tools that companies can use to improve. And it really goes back to what Brianne was saying, because you're trying to align what you are hoping to incentivize people to do with how you can talk about and value inventing and patenting. And I think what we see now is we see a lot of companies where they maybe have their DEI effort, and then they've got their whole invention patenting effort, and like the two never actually meet. And so I think that's what successful companies are doing. And a number of places have developed a toolkit to help companies really analyze their internal systems to bringing up these ideas and moving them toward actual patent applications and patents. And this is definitely a key part of it, is trying to align how you're thinking about your workplace culture, specifically as it relates to inventing and patenting.
Yeah, I also don't know any specific studies, and I think maybe that's the next study you guys will work on. But anecdotally, very few companies, Sujay, do that. Very few universities count patents as publications or anything else in evaluating tenure for professors. This is a bigger systemic issue at the C-suite level. So at the very first, as a first threshold issue, the C-suite needs to be educated as to the importance of these issues before they can start delegating down and recognizing their employees for the importance of these achievements. And I do want to emphasize that it's not just patents as a number for the heck of having patents or having a higher count. Patents are just, it's one way, one representation of the innovative, creative output of an individual or of a company. It's one of the best measures for that. There could be other things. There are other forms of intellectual property as well. But it really needs to begin with the recognition by the executives that innovation from everybody on their staff is conducive to the employee development, to the company's growth, and then ultimately to the community and the United States. Okay, with that, I think we've run out of time. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to Invent Together for commissioning the report. Jessica and Brianne for putting the report together, Margot for your continued work in innovation and education in the space, and thank you to CSIS for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you.